Over in Jerusalem, a little while back, Ronald Wyatt, a colleague and team member and friend, was excavating just outside the north wall of Jerusalem. And as he dug down, he was watched by a British tourist. And they came back at night, the team, and they would discuss their day's work at the Jerusalem Hotel, which is the place we usually stay at, close to the Skull Hill area. And as they were discussing it, this English tourist overheard what they were doing. And he asked Ron, can I come across and watch what you're doing? And what are you after? What are you trying to find? Ron said, look, I can't tell you that because the Antiquities Department has sworn me not to reveal what we're doing. And so this guy watched the team when they went out the next day, and as they got closer to the site, he was hiding around corners and he was discovering just exactly where they were working. And that night they came back, discussed again. He sat as close as he could to listen in. The next day he followed them again. He was going to get a whole picture of what was going on. And as it turned out, they were working around near the Skull Face north of Jerusalem. And he was getting a little bit of an eyeful. He knew now what they were after. So that night he said to Ron, I'm going to call the press. The whole world has to know about this. Ron says, no, you can't do that. We're sworn to secrecy. He said, I'm going to tell them anyway. The world has to know about this. And the guy called a press conference. And so the team flew out that night, the next morning rather, and they were determined not to be there when the press conference was called because they had sworn themselves to secrecy on what they were doing. The next morning, in the alleyway where the young man had called the conference to be at 9 o'clock, he was found in a pool of blood at 8 o'clock. And the newspaper said it was an Arab terrorist. Of course we know it wasn't. Jerusalem is a city that's on tenterhooks. You never know when a suicide bomber is going to come crashing into you and blow you both up. It's pretty hard over there at the moment. A lot of people are having sleepless nights. If only he had listened. Anyway, we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant. That great golden chest that graced Solomon's temple. In fact, King David, the father of Solomon, announced that the temple was to be built to enshrine the Ark of the Covenant. A magnificent temple, one of the wonders of the world, was specifically constructed to house a small golden chest. Now, why would that be so? What was so special about this golden chest? And what has happened to it? For 800 years it was the most precious artefact on the face of the earth, and then it vanished. And today, travellers and writers and lecturers and speculators have their theories about what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. Some say it landed over in Ireland. Others consider that it went to Rome, or down into Ethiopia, or up into Jordan, or over into the Dead Sea area of Israel. or even near Jerusalem. Mount of Olives, Bethlehem, or some other place. Mussolini went after it, couldn't find it. Hitler also thought that if he could get hold of the Ark of the Covenant, he would have no trouble ruling the whole world. What was so special about this great golden chest that graced Solomon's temple? Well, back there in those days when the kings of Judah ruled and the Babylonians were a world empire, the Babylonians came 3 times against Jerusalem and ultimately they destroyed it. And when they took the treasures away from Jerusalem, the golden Ark of the Covenant was not listed among the treasures that they took. So what did they do with it? They took the people prisoner for 70 years. After 70 years of Jerusalem lying in ruins, the people came back and they built a second temple. But the Ark of the Covenant was not in this second temple. Where was it? When the Romans came in AD 70 to destroy Jerusalem again and destroy the temple, they did not find the Ark in there. They did not find a number of things that they were searching for. Replicas were there in their hands, but not the originals. What happened to the originals? Well, today we are going to go on a search. We're going to take you right into our own day, and it's going to be a thrilling adventure, I can tell you. Jerusalem lay in ruins for a while, and all the searchers in Jerusalem went looking for the Ark, but they never found it. Not anywhere. And those rumours you hear today about the Ark being in one place or another, you don't have to believe them, friends. There are replicas in the world, but they're not the real thing. So, where is it? Well, in Jerusalem today, Ron Wyatt, in modern-day Jerusalem, had a very strong impression that he had to start digging in a certain place. And he was walking outside the walls of Jerusalem with the Antiquities Director, Dr. Dan Bahart, of the Israeli University. And they were talking about Roman pottery and other things, and suddenly Ron's arm shot out and he says, there's Jeremiah's grotto, the Ark's in there. Now that was uncharacteristic of him, because immediately he said that wasn't even in my head. How did it come out of my mouth? And the Antiquities Director said, Mr. Wyatt, I'm going to give you a permit. Come to my office. You go and start digging. And that again was uncharacteristic. That's not how it happens in Israel. And so the digging commenced at the end of 1978, near the skull face, about 750 metres north of the Damascus Gate of Old City of Jerusalem. Actually, it was just a rubbish dump there with a few dead cats on it to start with, and they had to clear away the rubble of many centuries that had been building up in front of the cliff face. And as they did so, they found that there were some niches in the cliff face. First of all, they found bones, and they realised this was a site where people had been stoned to death. Now, people being stoned to death were always done, the job was always done in a particular place. Not too many places around the city were polluted by such an act. And so there was a select place where the traditional stoning took place, and also crucifixions. The Romans took over the same site. They had found an execution site. Now, when we think of a crucifixion, we often see pictures of a crucifixion on top of a hill, don't we? But a Roman custom was not to do it that way. In actual fact, the Roman writers themselves tell us that they always selected a spot close to a public highway. And this was done in order that it be a deterrent to everyone else. So where people were passing by, they would do it, not I mean, there was no road went up over that hill and then down the other side. The roads always went around the sides of the hills and where they were going. And so the execution place would take on the side of a hill, not on the top of a hill. In fact, here's a Roman historian himself saying, whenever we crucify criminals, very crowded highways are chosen, so that many shall see it, and maybe be moved by fear of it, because all punishment does not pertain so much to revenge as to example. It was done publicly as a deterrent, and as many people as possible were invited to come past and have a look as they travelled along the highway. And the New Testament, actually speaking of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, says the same thing. It says, they that passed by jeered at him and wagged their heads in mockery. So it was a place where people were passing by. It was a public road, a public thoroughfare, not the top of a hill. Now, as the team came down in front of the cliff face, they came upon some very interesting shapes. And these were like plaque holes in the side of the cliff face into which notice boards had once been inserted. And of course this was a custom that often when a criminal was executed, his name or his crime or both were inserted into a signboard so people could read what it was all about. And in this case here, just outside Jerusalem, there were 3 of these all close together. Here I am standing with team member Bob Murrell in front of one of these. And there were 3 of these. Now it's interesting that there were 3 languages used in Jerusalem in the 1st century. There was Hebrew, Greek, which was the universal language, much like English is today around the world, and there was Latin, because the Romans occupied the area. And that would account for 3 languages expressing the crime of the criminal that was being executed. And so we have those 3 plaque holes there at this execution site. As the rubble was moved further down, a ledge was found, a stone ledge, which went out about 8 feet, and in the middle of it there was a stone, a squarish stone about 13 inches by 14, and it had finger marks to lift it up. And when you lifted it up out of the rock, you would find there was a post hole underneath which went down 23.5 inches. And this evidently was a place where a square cross had been inserted. And there is the square stone. And there I am just giving you the idea of the size. It's about 4 inches thick. Now, as the time went by and the digging continued and that platform was cleared away, packed earth in front of that had to be removed, and then about another 4 feet down there was another platform. And that second lower platform had 3 cross holes in it. So here you've got an elevated cross hole, and 4 feet lower down, just in front of it, 3 more cross holes for execution. And crucifixion, of course, was the popular Roman method at that time. Now, interestingly, there was a crack coming out from the higher cross hole and going down into the rock below. And the crack had not yet been examined, but would be later. As the clearing took place around the lower and upper platforms, there was found to be a stone wall in front of the cliff face that had been constructed, and the stone wall came out at right angles from the cliff face, as though this had once been a building that had been constructed around the crucifixion site. There's part of the wall you can see there now. And there was another stone coming out from the cliff face that was typical of what was used in ancient times as an altar stone. Now, the whole picture of this was at a place called Skull Hill, which has always been and still is today called Skull Hill. And you can see the shape of a skull, can't you? Now, there you have the back wall and the altar stone and the cross holes. And then as the earth was moved away, truckloads, many truckloads of rubble had to be taken away during this excavation. And then a roundish stone, like a round tabletop, was partly uncovered. But because there was so much rubble on, above it, the clearing wasn't completed, and it would be some time before the size of that stone would be determined by radar. It turned out that this round stone was 13 feet 2 inches in diameter and little less than 2 feet thick. Just try to remember those two figures, will you? 13 feet 2 by almost 2 feet. We'll come back to that a little later. Very significant. Now, this was a 1st century building. In fact, a coin of Tiberius, the Emperor Tiberius, was found among the rubble of this structure. So there you have the setting for the various components of this location that was gradually uncovered. Now, we little suspected at that time that the secret, that a secret of, I'll say this again, we little suspected at that time that a secret of this location was lying on the opposite side of the world in New Zealand. We'll return to that later. The key lay on the other side of the world to understanding what this all meant. Now, when all the rubble had been cleared away, there was found no entrance for any cave system whatsoever. And so it was determined to break into the system, and once that was done, it was found to contain a honeycomb of natural caves and crevices and tunnels inside the mountain. And in one place, it went down 40 feet before it continued, and then you'd come to another dead end, and so you'd start again, and you'd go this way and come to another dead end, and this went on for 2 years. And not the full time of 2 years, but in the excavation season over 2 years. There's a lot of work in clearing away, trying to make a space and a direction where something might exist that was worth looking for. And the determination in this was kept alive by Ron's memory of what had happened that particular day when he was walking with the Antiquities Director, and this was enough to keep him going. He knew there was something very special about this site. And he knew what he was looking for, but he didn't know how to get there. And one by one, various members of the party began to give up. They were getting discouraged. A couple of them flew home back to America because they had pneumonia. Ron actually had pneumonia too at the same time, but he was like a bulldog. He'd kill himself before he'd give up. And that was his wife. That's his wife there, Marinelle. As they dug and went further in, it was dusty, it was unpleasant, it was frightening because you had to squeeze through little places, you had to let the air out of your lungs sometimes, and then when you tried to fill it, you were so compressed it was hard to fill up your lungs. That's how narrow some of the cavities were as you crawled your way through. Very, very, you wouldn't want to be claustrophobic. Anybody here claustrophobic? Yeah, I think a few of us could be in certain situations. There's an air hose trying to purify the air underground. And this work went on from late 1978 until January the 6th, 1982. And on that date, something interesting was going to take place. But very few in the team were still working at the time. Most of them had given up. They came to Ron and this little Arab boy, Rafat we'll call him. That's not his real name. I want to protect his identity. were working here together, and Rafat was slim. He could squeeze his way through little cavities where some of the more well-built men couldn't do that, and he would look and say, no, that's not worth following, and they'd keep him there, and he was very good at that. And they came to this new spot, and there was a stalactite about 14 inches long blocking it. They removed the stalactite, and Rafat pushed his way through. In a few seconds, he was out. He was trembling. He was shouting, "What's in there? What's in there? I don't want to be here." Now, he never again worked underground. That was just whatever had happened. He said he didn't see anything, but something had happened. And Ron knew that now he had to go that direction. He pushed his way through, and that's the stalactite. He pushed his way through, and he would eventually find himself in a cavern system. And he had about 18 inches clearance between some stones, a whole lot of stones, and the ceiling. And as he pushed his way through, over a certain distance, he realised that underneath these stones there was dry rotted timber, and underneath the dry rotted timber there was dry rotted animal skins. And underneath that he caught a glimpse of something shiny with his torch, and he knew instinctively that he was in a cave where some remains of Solomon's temple had been secreted. As he pushed his way further, he came to another section later on over the top of the stones, where the stones stopped and a stone case went to about 6 inches from the ceiling. And here he then saw that this stone case had been cracked, and there was a crack going down the side. Ron knew what was in that stone case. His torch could see the tops of it, but he couldn't see any more. It would be years later before he actually saw. He went in quite a few times after this, but he knew what he was looking at. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, friends, is something so special that it has even defied the camera on a number of occasions. On the next visit then, he took a Polaroid camera, and even though he could see everything clearly with his eyes, it was hazy on the camera. He took a 35mm camera in with the same result. And he thought, well, what can I do? I know what this is, but how can I tell anybody? How can I get evidence? Because I don't see any way I can get all the stuff out of the cave that's full up with stones and other stuff. It's been deliberately concealed, and I don't know what I can do about this. And so for some time he told nobody. He told his wife, Mary Nell. Members of the team knew about it, close friends knew about it, but he didn't dare go to the Antiquities Department yet, not yet. And when he did, and they knew what had been found, they knew that this was going to be something so explosive it could start a third world war, could start a jihad easily, quite easily. And Dan Barhart, that's the man there in the picture, on the right-hand side, and a few of his antiquities colleagues talked about what shall we do. And Dan said, well, look, I'm game enough to go in. If you guys are all chicken, I'm going to go and have a look. He got 3 paces from the excavation tunnel and he collapsed on the ground groaning. He was paralysed for 2 weeks. And later he would make a statement and say, I am never again going to try to look at that holy ark. Very strange thing to happen. So, how did they get it in there? Solomon's temple was built, as I mentioned, to house the Ark of the Covenant. To make provision for the ark's safekeeping, Solomon constructed a sand hydraulic elevator in the most holy place, which was the second room of the temple. And that's the room where the ark was, which you see there. Now, on the opposite end of the temple, on the outside, there were two pillars. These two pillars were given a name. And in the Torah, the Old Testament, the first book of Kings, it says, and he set up the right pillar and called the name thereof Jachin. And he set up the left pillar and called the name thereof Boaz. Now, why were these two pillars given names? Jachin means fulcrum and Boaz means force. Was this a clue to their purpose? Well, the height of each capital is recorded as being 5 cubits. That's the normal position. The capital is that section near the top of the pillar, which fitted in like a piston, you might say. Now, when the Babylonians ransacked that temple, they did not find the Ark of the Covenant. They did not find the altar of incense. They did not find the 7-branch lampstand, and they did not find the table of showbread, the 4 most precious artefacts in that temple. They were not there. But they did note one thing, that the height of the capitals was not 5 but 3 cubits. Something had happened to diminish the height of the capitals on top of the pillars. So what had happened? How did 2 cubits, that's about 25 inches, of solid brass weighing several tons sitting on top of a 31-foot high column disappear? What happened to it? The answer is this. From the normal position, when the pillars stood there with the capital on top, 5 cubits above it, it had sunk down into the pillar and been pushed down. And something had happened with a lever under the temple. And that's how the ark had escaped capture. The elevator had gone up. The ark had been moved into the elevator. The elevator had then gone down. And then everything had, and the ark had been taken away with the other vessels quite easily from inside the temple, through the floor and out, with no one, the Babylonian army not knowing what was going on, nor anybody else. And then the pillars were, the capitals and the pillars were pushed back into position so no one would ever know. But when they were pushed back, they were 2 cubits shorter. Okay, now the ark then was transported through a tunnel down into what is now today known as Zedekiah's cave. That's encircled with the yellow line. The emergency escape route was recently discovered. And this is what you're seeing on the map. From the temple, where the blue arrow is, the ark was taken along the straight line down into Zedekiah's cave and then pushed through a tunnel to a place near Skull Hill, outside the city walls. First into the cave, and what you're looking at now is a pillar which is not a natural pillar. When they cut out the cave, they left some pillars standing so the roof would not fall down, because the city was built above. But one of these pillars is not a natural, untouched pillar. It's a pillar that has been built into place to plug up a hole above in the ceiling. We believe that is the hole through which everything came into the cave. and down along into the tunnel toward Skull Hill, which of course was still in no man's land between the Babylonian army and the city wall. Jeremiah, the prophet that wrote about the ark and who was the prophet that warned the king of the coming Babylonian armies, is believed to have been in charge of the job with the temple priests, and everything was taken into the cave at the end of the tunnel. Okay, now what's so special about this artefact that they had to secrete it away? We read records of people touching it or looking into it and dropping dead. What was its purpose? You might call it a time capsule. It was an object that encapsulated a prophecy. A powerful prophecy, a life and death prophecy. Now, life is one of our most precious possessions, isn't it? Or is it the most precious thing we've got? How many of you think life is the most precious thing you have? Yeah, I think we all agree on that, don't we? Because if you don't have life, nothing else you have, you haven't got it, have you?
Our soul.
But pardon?
Our soul.
Now, here's a young couple who got married. They were deeply in love. They got a brand new house. And then came the dreadful news. The young lady had cancer. It's a story we're too familiar with, isn't it? Even young children. And it happens to all of us, you know, even if we don't get diseases like that. All of us in time, the hair goes grey, face begins to wrinkle, doesn't it? The teeth go out, the back gets stooped, and it's not long before we're in the hospital bed and we're carried off in a coffin and we're put under the ground. And that's the story that happens to all of us. Isn't that true? Now, you know, death is not natural. Science today has discovered that things should continue. The cells actually should continue replacing themselves. As one scientist has actually put on writing, he said, look, death is unnatural. Theoretically, man is quite immortal. His body tissues replace themselves. He is a self-repairing machine. And yet he gets old and dies, and the reasons of it are still a mystery. Science is baffled as to why we die. Now, what if you could find a magic pill? What if somebody discovered a magic pill that could actually do something about that and keep you living on forever and ever? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Okay. I think that's been man's greatest desire right through history, is to live longer with your loved ones. It'd be nice maybe even to live forever if this world was better. And this is where the Ark of the Covenant actually comes into the picture. The Ark was built with the understanding that every person on earth is a created being, intelligently created. We're not just clumsy accidents of evolution. And if you're not quite sure about that, I've got a DVD on that on the book table you're welcome to take home. We were given laws for our good. I mean, the law of gravity is there. You jump off a roof, what happens to you? Okay. So, and my mother used to say to me, Jonathan, don't put your hand on the stove. And if I did, I'd know what was the result. We know these are laws. These are physical laws, and we can't get anything. And our parents, when we're small, tell us these laws out of love. And these laws are there not so that we'll be robots that just do what we're told, but for our own good. We are still given free will, aren't we? All of us have free will. One of the most precious things, to love or to hate. And love is the most beautiful thing only because it's freely given and freely received. But we've messed up this world. Look at the news. Terrible, isn't it? That's why Uncensored magazine exists, because there are so many people covering up what's going on and perpetrating the wrong to oppress us and make worse happen. This is a dangerous world. It's getting worse all the time. And we want a world that doesn't have that kind of problem, don't we? All of us. And wouldn't you like to live a long time in a beautiful world like that without sickness and pain? Okay. Now, we are told in the book, the original source that tells us about the Ark of the Covenant, that original source says that we are told by our life giver to do things, to do those rules that are for our good, but we've told him to get out of our lives, just like some children say to their parents, "Oh, come on, Mum and Dad, you're old-fashioned." Cut off from our source of life because we don't want to be told what to do. We die. I mean, if you've got a life source and you cut it off, you die. And that is the cause of death today, because life should keep on going. And we all die. We're all on the death cell, and this planet is a sad little planet. Can we get ourselves out of this mess? No way. Okay, this is why the Ark of the Covenant was commissioned. Now, most people don't know anything about the Ark of the Covenant, but the source which tells us about it, the primary source of information about the ancient Ark of the Covenant, gives us that information, that this is why the Ark was built. Okay, so it has to do with life and death. Something that's very, very precious to us, the life side anyway, and it was built to give us all some hope. That's the purpose of the Ark of the Covenant, and specifically, something used to happen once a year in Solomon's temple with the ark. An animal was sacrificed and its blood was sprinkled on the lid of the ark. Now, the lid had a special name. Why was this act done? Well, first of all, let me tell you this. I know of a man, a friend of mine, who actually is quite famous in America, and he appears on television. He was driving pretty fast along the road one day, and he didn't see a traffic cop waiting for him. And you know what happens when they catch you, don't you? He went across to the car, he started writing him out a ticket, and the man said, "Okay, give me your driving licence." And he looked, "Hey, I know you, my wife watches you all the time. Look, I can't cancel the ticket, but let me do something. My wife loves you so much on TV that here is a $50 note. I'm going to pay the fine for you. You take it with you with this ticket and you'll be okay." In other words, the fine still has to be paid, but someone else does the paying. All right? Now, the ancient civilizations knew about that promise that was enshrouded in the Ark of the Covenant. "I'll pay the penalty for you," said somebody. And do you know what? All nations knew that promise. China, Africa, Europe, India, in all countries they knew this promise. It was in their mythology, it was in their religion, it was in their history. It was a generally known thing. Because our ancestors were quite, we may not be religious, but our ancestors were. And they had a grasp on this kind of thing. And they said, somebody is coming in the future to offer himself like a sacrifice, just like the blood of the sacrifice goes onto the ark, so his sacrifice is going to be paid instead of you, so you go free and you can live forever again. And that was enshrined in the Ark of the Covenant. Now, isn't that amazing? The violated law was put inside. You know what? There was 2 tablets of stone with a law written inside them. We called that the 10 Commandments. That was inside the ark. And on top of that was a lid called the mercy seat. Now, the law cannot be changed. Justice demands a penalty be paid, so someone has to pay it. And that gives us mercy. and the lid of the ark was called the mercy seat. And once a year this ceremony was enacted inside Solomon's temple. The promised one's blood will be spilt and his mercy will set you free. Okay, we're in the death cell, we can't help ourselves. Somebody comes with a rope and says, hang on to the rope. You can't buy that kind of rescue. Lasting life can't be bought. Doesn't matter how good I am, I can't lengthen my life by doing good deeds for the Red Cross or anything else. And working for charity, that's not going to make me live longer necessarily. I can't do anything about it. It can only be given to me and I've got to accept it, just like a prisoner on death row. Okay? So, it's a free gift. Now, a friend gives me a free gift, he gives me a birthday gift. I say, hey, how much did that cost you? I'd like to pay for it. What would our friend do? He'd be insulted, wouldn't he? Okay? All right, the prophecy of the Ark of the Covenant said it's going to happen in Mount Moriah. Now, have you ever heard of that mountain? It's a mountain actually in Israel. That this event is going to happen in Mount Moriah. There's Old Jerusalem. Now, Mount Moriah is where Solomon's temple was built, ultimately. And Mount Moriah, the prophecy said, is the place where this ultimate sacrifice would be made. Now for the big surprise. Mount Moriah is where Ron Wyatt started digging and found the crucifixion site. And Mount Moriah has this big crack going through not in the lid only of the big box that enshrined the ark in the cave, but that crack went straight up through the rock to the elevated post hole at the crucifixion site. Now, Jewish history tells us that on the 14th of Nisan in 31 AD at 9 o'clock in the morning, something happened. A man was executed. That was April the 23rd, 31 AD. Fix that date. April 27th, April 27, 31 AD at 9 o'clock in the morning. This is recorded history. He was put on an execution cross. At 3 o'clock, 6 hours later, the earth shook. There was an earthquake. The rock was split open from the cross hole down to that cave. This is history. And we've found the crack. Goes right down 20 feet from that elevated platform to the ceiling of the cave below. And this happened at Skull Hill, place of execution. Now it's interesting that in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, so the record says. And in the garden, a new sepulchre. A sepulchre is a tomb. It was nearby. Looking down from here, from the top of the crucifixion site, down into a garden, we do find the remains of a tomb. And this tomb is a very interesting one. The person was taken off that cross that afternoon. His body was taken across to the tomb and he was laid inside that spot you see there. Interestingly, it was not his tomb. A rich member of the Jewish council who sympathised with the man's mission donated his own tomb for this criminal, so-called, to be laid there, and he was placed in there, but he was too tall and they had to quickly hack out 3 more inches. The length of the space of the man that owned the tomb was 5'8". The length of the man that had to be put into the tomb was 5'11". And there's evidence that those last 3 inches were hacked out very quickly and unexpectedly for somebody else other than the man who owned the tomb, which he had built for himself. There's my wife Josephine sitting in a trough in front of the tomb, which measures just under 2 feet. And that was a place for a great stone to be rolled to seal the tomb. Now, interestingly, the owner of that tomb was a man called Joseph. He was a very rich nobleman. He was an importer of tin and lead. And he was a trader with England, with the Cornish coast of England. And he had a shipping company. He was quite a wealthy man. He had an interest in the tin mines of Cornwall, and he also had a shipping fleet. And he had a lot of influence in the land of Israel at that time, and he went to the Roman governor Pilate and he asked for the body of the man who was executed. Now, by law, only a close relative was allowed to do that. And the Jewish records state that this man, Joseph of Arimathea, was the great uncle of the executed man. And that's why he was allowed to claim the body. Jewish records tell us this. The Jewish Talmud tells us this. You ask any rabbi. And this man was then taken into this tomb, and there was rolled in front of the tomb a great stone. And the Roman soldiers were put on guard because this man had made a claim that he would rise on the third day. But his enemies said, now that's nonsense, we don't believe that, but we don't want anybody coming and stealing his body and making a false claim. And so they put the Roman soldiers in guard. Now, where the stone would have fitted, that's me touching the edge where the rock comes out to receive the edge of that round stone. And then on the left-hand side of the entrance, there is a peg. There was a peg actually both sides, an iron peg, which would be placed beside the stone both ways, so the stone could not be moved either side without taking out the peg. That makes sense, doesn't it? And the stone itself, if you measure between the two peg holes, is 13 feet 2 inches. Did we mention that somewhere before? All right, that's interesting. Okay, now, this stone, an engineer has done a calculation for me. He said this stone would have weighed over 13 tonnes. Pretty heavy. And the peg, he calculated, would be able to withstand, the peg was 2 of my finger thicknesses. The peg would be able to withstand 60 to 80 tonnes pressure before snapping. But because it was pliable, it might even have taken more pressure before you could snap it off. And it would have to be done very quickly. You could not take out that stone without taking out the pegs. I mean, 60 to 80 tonnes pressure from a stop-start would be impossible, humanly speaking, just to push. You couldn't do it. Okay, there we have the peg's been taken out of the other one, but this one, the peg is still in. But the stone is gone. So how on earth did the stone get taken away with this peg still being here? Well, the truth is that this peg is not all there. The part that stuck out has been snapped off. But there's also about 1.5 inches of bending took place before it snapped to the left. Some great force somehow pushed the stone without taking off the peg and snapped the peg right off sheer with the wall. Humanly speaking, that's impossible. But there is the broken off peg still in there. And this was examined by the Israeli Antiquities Department 4 years ago. They did a test on it and they found that there was lead around the peg. This was a Roman method of fixing something in a wall. The lead made it easier to hit the peg into the wall. And here we have then Roman pegs on a Jewish tomb, a very unusual and unique phenomenon, unique in the whole world. That Roman pegs would have been put into a Jewish tomb. It was never done. There had to have been a collusion between the Roman governor and the Jewish Sanhedrin for this to have happened. It could not have happened any other way. Something very special must have happened here. And the ancient record of eyewitnesses, the soldiers themselves, says that a great shining light came down, the stone was suddenly rolled away by a great shining being, and that the occupant of the tomb got up and walked out of the tomb. And when people came there, they saw a young man sitting in the tomb, and he says, "Don't look here, he's gone. He's alive." You can go to Jerusalem and visit that spot and you'll see it. Now, the link is a rich man's garden tomb. I'm talking archaeologically here. A rich man's garden tomb. You've got Skull Hill just to the east of it, very close. And down in the middle, at a lower level than the tomb, just slightly lower, you've got this ancient building, which encloses a crucifixion site. And in front of those 4 cross holes is this round stone that comes from the rich man's tomb. Somebody made a link between the tomb and the crucifixion site and rolled the stone, got people to roll the stone down there and enclose it in a building to memorialise some kind of event. Who would have done that? All right. The man who needed 2 graves, and now we go for a trip to England. The man who owned this grave was Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph had tin mines in Cornwall. He had a fleet of ships. That's why he was rich. But because Joseph had defied the Sanhedrin's plan to throw the bodies of their enemy down into a rubbish dump, which was a practice for executed criminals, throw them down to a rubbish dump, wipe all memory of them so that their name is forgotten, their whole memory is forgotten, just burn them in the rubbish dump. Joseph claimed the body instead, gave it an honourable burial in his tomb, and Joseph became a marked man in the land of Israel. Joseph then, he was cast into prison temporarily, but because of his wealth he was pulled out. And then they decided to do something else because they could not face the public on what they were going to do. They had to do this secretly. Joseph and the close friends of the person who was executed were put on a boat off the coast of Israel into the Mediterranean Sea by this man, Saul of Tarsus. Joseph was hated by the Sanhedrin for what he had done, and Saul took the lead and said, "All right, we'll get rid of them. He's too influential. There'll be an outroar if we do something publicly. We'll push them out into the sea, no sails, no oars, out into the ocean and let them die at sea." And that's what they did. Him and about 11 others were set adrift. However, by a great providence, they landed up in the south of France at the city of Marseille. They survived. And then from there, they made an overland trip to England, where the tin mines were, where Joseph had friends. And here he knew that his Jewish enemies and his Roman enemies could not catch him because Rome had not been able to conquer that part of Britain. Never did. Here I am exploring one of those tin mines. And he landed at a place which is today known as Glastonbury. How many of you have heard of Glastonbury? Very famous place in England. They came into Glastonbury, where Joseph had friends, and this, by the way, is a very famous thorn tree. You know, the old record says that the man that the Sanhedrin hated so much, a crown of thorns was placed on his head and pressed down into his head, and then they mocked him and said, "Hi, King of the Jews." And those thorns came from a thorn bush that flowers every flowers once a year in Israel. Now, bushes in England flower at a different time of the year. But this bush has a story behind it. When Joseph and his party landed in Britain, his staff was put into the ground and it started taking root. I mean, you can do that today with a lot of different plants. And this one is the only one in the world that flowers both at the time they do in Israel and the time they do in England. It flowers twice a year, the Israeli time and the British time. Isn't that amazing? This is not the original tree. The Puritans cut down the original tree, but cuttings were taken from it, and this is the cutting. This is the child of the original tree. You can go there and you'll see it growing today in England. And this is Joseph's tomb. An interesting thing, on the outside of this tomb, there's two initials, J.A., Joseph of Arimathea. And underneath it, it says, I came after I buried my Lord. That's his inscription. He gave one tomb away, now he had a new tomb in England. And you can visit that spot today. Now, Joseph's party who went with him brought with them some very private family records. The close family of this man who were exiled with him had written records which I didn't know about until a few months ago, and which probably nobody in New Zealand virtually knows about yet, or nobody in the world much knows about. These records, hundreds of pages of family records, were kept by the immediate family of this man and his close friends. And Joseph took these with him to England. And they were openly kept and cherished and perfectly preserved until the Synod of Whitby in the year 664. And this is when the Roman religion came into England and took over, and anything that was not Latin had to be destroyed. So any Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic documents, or even early British documents were ordered burned. And the descendants of Joseph of Arimathea and the descendants of these family and friends of this executed man didn't want to lose this. So what they did was they gave away some of the less precious manuscripts and they were burnt, and they went underground with the rest. And they preserved them for another 1,000 years or so. And the persecution continued, however, as authorities, secular and religious, tried to hunt down these other documents because they knew they existed. And these documents, the Council of Whitby actually is the council that decided these documents had to be destroyed. And so they burnt what they could find. And then the descendants, as the persecution continued in England in the mid-1800s, the descendants left Britain and they smuggled the documents out of England and they smuggled them into New Zealand, and they're here today. A colleague of mine has spent 3 months examining them. I have been going through some of them. I still look forward to seeing more of them. And they tell a story, friends, that explains many things we never realised or understood before. They're here in New Zealand, these first century reports. Now, ask you about this. Is this a coincidence? We have the crucifixion site, we have the garden tomb, and we have the Skull Hill. Now, from this location, from the Skull Hill, Joseph and his party were exiled to England. Their descendants came to Point X in New Zealand. Our teams were digging at Skull Hill, but we didn't realise the true ramifications of what we were discovering I came back from our digs to Australia. My wife had a strong impression that we should migrate to New Zealand. And today, friends, virtually next door to the papers, one of my colleagues had come to live. And he was granted access to the documents because he too was a fugitive. And when he compared what we had done on our archaeological work with the papers that he was reading, suddenly it twigged. And he said, "Jonathan, this is absolutely mind-blowing." I'm going to share some of it with you in a moment. What we had uncovered and what he was reading in documents 2,000 years old were a perfect match. And neither could understand the full picture. From the documents alone, you wouldn't understand it all. From our diggings alone, you wouldn't understand it all. Put them together, something amazing happens. This is an archaeological discovery, friends, that is absolutely incredible. Now, these documents describe that tomb, and in 22 different particulars, the description in the documents and our findings in the tomb match perfectly, a perfect match. I'd have to spend an afternoon on that, so I can't tell you all about that right now. Now, these documents also tell us that the followers of this executed man had 3 special places after that event where they used to meet regularly. One was the upper room in which 12 of them had sat with him before for their very last meal together. The other place was, and they called that the upper room. It was the upper room of a building inside the old city of Jerusalem. The other place was the village of Bethany to the east of the old city of Jerusalem, where this man had quite a lot of friends. And the third place that they met was Skull Hill, where they actually met regularly and had a building constructed for that purpose, which would not have been possible earlier. The interesting thing is that the execution of that man caused such an outrage in the city of Jerusalem that thousands of people clamoured for execution to be stopped on that location. So no more executions were made on that location that we excavated. And that's why Joseph, with his money, was able to buy that land next to his tomb, and they constructed the building. And here is how these 2,000-year-old records bring us up to date in the picture. The link. Now, that structure in front of Skull Hill was used from the year 31 to the year 66 AD. So what does this have to do with King Arthur? You wouldn't think there was any connection, would you? What does this have to do with the golden, or what they call the Holy Grail, that cup that was used at that Last Supper? And what does it have to do with the Knights of the Round Table and the sword? All right, now the legends have been around for centuries. Rehashed, plenty of fiction added in, as usually happens, and modern editions have been added to the story to boost book sales, and I know a lot of authors do that just to make money, and they're not so intent on truth as they are on money coming in from their popular book sales. Now the Grail legend is this, and this is the popular legend. The cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper was said to have been brought to England by Joseph of Arimathea. And it disappeared and was sought by the knights of King Arthur, especially his and other knights as well in British history. And It was said to revitalise, give life. That was the purpose of the cup. That's why people wanted to find it. That's the legend. Okay, what's the truth? Grail hunters have been looking for the physical cup to drink from. And all the while, the cup they wanted to drink from eluded them. They tried to do physically what they were meant to do spiritually. And so they die without succeeding, even though it is within their reach. Now, this is a mystery. It's like a riddle, isn't it? Okay, let's get on to it. The legends of the Holy Grail are older than British mythology has generally placed them. The first century reports that I'm talking about, it was only after we matched up what was in Joseph's first century paperwork with what our archaeological expeditions uncovered that the implications became quite dramatic. Only then did we discover that our Jerusalem expeditions that unearthed more than any of us imagined, nothing less than the key to the Holy Grail legends, Arthur's Round Table, and the whole 9 yards, you might say. Yeah, this is huge. Okay. This became evident only, I'll repeat this again, this became evident only when our diggings were compared with what we found recently in the first century Grail documents. One who's been through these eyewitness diaries gets the impression that those early Christians in Jerusalem believed that the Ark of the Covenant in their time was right under the crucifixion site in Golgotha. And that this very spot, this is what they believed, that this very, we get this from the documents, that this very spot, eternal life, was won by someone dying for all others who would accept it. This is what the Grail documents are telling us. And the refugees from Israel who then settled in Glastonbury, England, told their British converts how this man had held up the cup at the Last Supper and announced, the blood of the grape which you're drinking from this cup represents my blood which is going to be shed for the world. And then how this crucifixion the next day at Golgotha fulfilled the promise of that cup. The crucifixion site was the immortality promise made true according to these documents. So here's the geography of the site. What we've got is a man dying up there. Then we've got below it the ark, which is hidden away underground. Then this man says it's completed. His head droops, he dies. An earthquake comes, splits the rock open. The Roman centurion thrusts a spear into his side to make sure he's dead. Down comes from the pericardium sac in his body, the blood comes down off that post, it drops through the crack, it continues down and hits the mercy seat of the ark below in the cave. And, now this is incredible, and I don't know how it could happen. The earthquake splits the rock, but then the split jumps through the air several inches and then splits the lid that's covering the ark, so it opens up so the blood can come straight through. If you can tell me how that happened, I'm interested. But it happened because we found it. That's what's happened. The archaeological team found that it happened. Okay, the blood is spilt on the mercy seat and the blood comes down onto the mercy seat. There, friends, you have the origin of the Grail that gives eternal life. The lifeblood is given. It comes down onto the mercy seat. So anyone who gets that gets life. Anyone who accepts that gets life. That's the story of the Grail. Now, the blood has been tested. When Ron first went into the cave in Jerusalem, he saw a black substance in the crack there just above the ceiling. He saw it also down there on the lid. But first of all, this was more accessible. And he took a sample of that blood. I'm going to show you the event that took place on movie now that followed that. This was taken on October the 22nd, 1989, 20 feet underground outside of Jerusalem. Ron is running his finger there, down in the crack. He's pointing to some drops of blood, in particular here. He's going to take a sample of one of these in a moment and put it into a canister. He's going to seal it. It's going to remain sealed. This case is going to be opened on October the 10th, 1996. Other samples have already been tested in 6 laboratories in Israel and in America before this, and I'll tell you the result of those tests in a moment. But now we're going to take out one of these pieces. There's going to be sterile water poured into it at blood temperature. And Richard, member of the team, is now going to put this under the microscope. You're going to see this blood on the screen. Red corpuscles plus somatids. Somatids are tiny little particles you'll see moving in between, which form 2 of the ingredients of blood, human blood. And there it is close up. This blood, friends, was tested at an Israeli laboratory and in several laboratories in America. And when Ron was invited into the laboratory, he asked the man, he said, well, is it animal blood or human blood? The man said, this is human blood. Where'd you get it from? He said, tell me more. And the man suddenly started going wild. He looked as though he was in a semi-panic. He said, tell me, what kind of blood is this? This is human blood, but it's different. Josephine and I were invited by Ron to come and inspect the laboratory analysis of the blood test. The laboratory analysis, I mean, in ordinary blood, any geneticists here today? Geneticists will tell you that all of us receive blood from our mother. We receive from our mother and our father. And we have chromosomes from our father, 23. We have chromosomes from our mother, 23. That's 46 chromosomes that we all have. This blood analysed in Jerusalem does not have 46 chromosomes. It has 23 chromosomes from a mother. It has a Y chromosome, which means it's male. But the laboratory man said, this man had no earthly father. That was the laboratory analysis. Now, the story told by the crucifixion eyewitnesses passed into the lore of their French and British listeners. And when the Vikings came over to Britain, and then the Normans, the group's Middle Eastern origins were forgotten by the powers that be. That's Joseph's origins and the descendants. Some of their stories were turned into the legends of King Arthur's myth and legend in Great Britain. The stone from the tomb, which was later moved to the crucifixion site, is the origin of the Round Table. The 12 apostles who subsequently sat around the stone in worship services every week in Jerusalem from AD 31 to AD 66 became the 12 knights around the Round Table. The apostles taught that in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. That's what they wrote. They also wrote that the Word of God is alive and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword. And the cross upon which he hung was fixed into the rock. In British legend, this ultimately mutated into a physical sword stuck into the rock. The secret of living forever is bound up in this Golgotha site. That's the origin of the cup, the grail that gives life. Well, okay, now just before we close, just imagine living forever. Here's what was revealed and passed on by Joseph and his associates to their listeners in Britain when they arrived. Joseph said, this is not some vague thing, it's a solid certainty. You'll have the equipment one day, if you accept what I'm telling you, what happened at that site at Skull Hill, if you accept that, told them, he said, you will have the equipment one day that nobody has heard of yet, that nobody has yet seen. If you latch hold of it and will live forever, you will have that. Whatever your imagination is able to dream up, the Creator has something even better in store for you. That's what Joseph told them. And it will not be boring. Nobody can outdream the Creator. Whatever great and wonderful things the earth can offer today, the new one will still be better. It will be transformed. All things will be new. There will be peace. No terrorist attacks, no HIV, no swine flu, no atomic radiation. No mad cow disease, no drugs, no cancer, no more hospitals, no more health insurance, no more mortgage payments, and travel unlimited. Achieve all whatever dreams you have now, you'll be able to achieve. This is what Joseph went and told the people. He said that event that happened there at Skull Hill has made that possible to anyone who wants to accept it. It's about accepting the fine being paid for you. If you don't accept it, of course, you don't have it paid for you, but it's paid there. In short, the coming new world is something we all want. Today, the news is being censored. The news is being covered up. The truth is being covered up. Nobody wants to know about it. Joseph got rid of his enemies and went and told those who were willing to listen that this is going to be what's coming. In short, the coming new life involves joy. It also involves adventure and discovery and beauty and gladness. Celebration like you've never had before. Now, who wouldn't like to have that kind of life? I'm just going to leave that in your heads. It's worth thinking about, eh? There's our archaeological findings. There's the 2,000-year-old documents. We marry them up, and that's what comes out of it, what you've seen this afternoon. Thank you.
Can we take some questions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Jonathan, we have a few minutes for questions if you'd like to
That was
direct them
brilliant.
at Jonathan.
Excuse my voice.
Okay. Jonathan,
Yes.
you call.
Yes.
There's this new research has come out with the Hidden King, fifth generation from Queen Victoria who didn't.
Speak up, please.
Yes, I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. There's a new book out on the Hidden King, where the fifth generation from Victoria, Queen Victoria, not having divorced her first husband, she was flying Pennyboard for Prince Albert. So that's illegitimate from Prince Albert, and the fifth generation now is in Portugal, Francisco Manuel. And in the book it's claimed that he's both a heritage from the Magdalene Golden Chalice line and the royal. So please some comments.
Now, I'm not familiar with that particular one, but I know there's lots of books being written about the Grail and the heritage and so on, which are not based upon fact.
Could I ask you a question?
Yes.
Where is the evidence that the Ark of the Covenant has any of the prophecies that you mentioned? I've read a few things about the Ark, but never once until now have I heard about the prophecies and in the Ark, and I wonder if you could elucidate them, please.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Yes, the prophecies in the Ark virtually are that. The mercy seat is the key to it.
What?
The mercy seat is the key to the Ark prophecy.
Go ahead.
The mercy seat, and Jewish tradition tells us that the mercy seat had the concept of substitution, where the sacrifice is the substitute for the guilty person, and that when the priest once a year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, went in and sprinkled the blood of animal sacrifice on the mercy seat, that was a prophecy that anyone who would accept the substitution would be relieved of guilt and could be free.
I understand that there was animal sacrifices made, right? But my specific question is, how do you interpret that as a prophecy rather than as what was going on at the time?
Okay, thank you. In the story of Abraham in Genesis, Abraham was told to go and make a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. And then he was told that the Lord would provide himself a sacrifice, and in that mountain it would be seen. In other words, that the sacrifice was a prophecy of the ultimate sacrifice that would be seen on Mount Moriah.
And this you got from Genesis?
Genesis chapter 22.
Where it says what?
That go to Mount Moriah.
That what?
He was told to go to Mount Moriah. He was then told to offer his son as a sacrifice.
Yes, right.
And then a lamb was found in the bushes, which took his place. And then the prophecy was made lower down in the chapter that in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen, that the Lord himself will provide himself a sacrifice.
Okay. I don't see that as a prophecy.
It says he will provide himself as the sacrifice.
Because then later JC bleed down onto the...
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
Do you give any credence to the theory that the Ark was a capacitor?
No, I don't. The Ark can be handled by a person who was appointed. The high priest had no problem.
And yet, in the Bible, it does mention that it had a tremendous amount of electrical energy.
It does say that the presence of God, and the Bible comes out straight and says the presence of God was there, and that any unholy person could not approach it because he was holy. Yeah.
So, in your opinion,
Could you
What-
take the mic, please? Thank you.
so in your opinion, what is or was the Ark of the Covenant?
Thank you. It was a wooden box that was covered in gold, and then had a lid of gold, solid gold, and then it had two cherubims, one on each end, which represented actually the throne of eternity with the covering cherubs, and the laws of the universe, the laws of the Ten Commandments, which is the standard for all human beings. In other words, it was called the Ark of the Covenant because the covenant was the Ten Commandments. And in other words, the box that contains the Ten Commandments.
Jonathan?
Yep.
Sorry to be a pest.
No, you're not. This man's no pest, is he?
No!
I disagree.
We have some blurry pictures that you showed, and your comments that neither a Polaroid nor a 35mm camera could image the discovery. Without being negative, to coin a phrase, what about video cameras or anything else that could provide us with any evidence that the Ark was actually found?
Right. I haven't had time to go into all these details, but on the fourth visit into the cave, in October 1995, Ron went in there and the whole place was cleaned up. There were 4 young men in that. They looked like 4 young men. They said to him, "Go and get your camera." He went and got his camera, and everything was photographed. All the stones had been removed, everything had been removed. He couldn't believe how that had happened. This is a big story, but I write about it in my book, Ark of the Covenant, documented. And then he took the camera and photographed everything in a panorama, and they said, "Make a copy of this and put it on this shelf." At the time when the New World Order forces the world to make laws that human beings should not be keeping, this is coming out. And then the whole world is going to see the footage, and they're also going to see the Ten Commandments. And by the way, at that same month, the Israeli Antiquities, we were in Jerusalem at the time, the Israeli Antiquities sent 4 young men, 6 young men actually, through Zedekiah's cave, down the tunnel, to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant, because they believed that it was not in such a safe place. Now the Arabs, of course, own the bus station in the area above it. They wanted to take it out of the cave and transport it to another part of Jerusalem, which is strictly under Jewish control. These 6 men, we were in Jerusalem when this happened, these 6 men went in, they never came out. When Ron flew in to join us, and he went to the Antiquities to ask them if he could help in any way, because he usually lends his own equipment to them so that they have a good reciprocal situation where he helps them, they help him. They said, "Yes, Mr. Wyatt, we can do with your help, but this is going to be most unusual. We're afraid to go in there because our 6 men didn't come out. Will you go in and have a look? Because we know that you've been in and out, no problem." So he went in, and 70 feet in, out of a 270-foot tunnel, 70 feet in, here were these 6 men lying on the ground. They were lying on their backs, their eyes were open, their eyes were crossed toward each other, the 6 of them. He went out and reported it. They went and got body bags. They pulled them out with ropes. They didn't dare go in. And this appeared in the newspaper, in the Jerusalem Post and in an American newspaper. One report said that 6 men had been killed by Arab terrorists. The second report said 6 men had died trying to retrieve a priceless artefact, but the artefact was unknown.
So that leaves us with the question, doesn't it? Where is it?
Yes, we know where it is. Ron actually, in 1999, August 1999, Ron well, before that, Ron was touring New Zealand here, and probably some audiences may remember if they ever attended and heard him. He toured New Zealand and Australia, and he was telling people in Australia and in New Zealand that the next trip in he was going to take me in with him to the Ark of the Covenant. And he told me, and we made plans to go in together. But on August the 4th, he died of colon cancer, which was running in the family. But he was working right up to the day he died.
Okay, so where is it?
Yeah, it's right there. Now let me say this.
Where?
Under the crucifixion site in Skull Hill, near the Arrow bus station, 20 feet underground.
I thought they went in and it was empty.
Those 6 men were zapped.
Yeah, but you said that the video shows that the room is empty.
No, the stones have been taken out.
Yeah.
The dry rotted timber's been taken out. The dry rotted animal skins have been taken out. And the Ark of the Covenant is on the eastern side of the cave. The table of showbread is on the south side of the cave. And the altar of incense and the 7 branch lampstand are also there in the same relationship in the cave as they were in Solomon's temple in relation to each other.
So everything else is missing.
Everything's there.
But the things the items you said are missing, they're gone.
No, they're all there still. They're down there now, still, at this moment.
May I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
What came to New Zealand exactly?
What came to New Zealand?
Yeah, please.
The 2,000-year-old papers that describe everything that happened that day.
You've seen these papers?
Yes, I'm going through them at the moment.
Where are they?
Share them with the group?
Let me tell you this. The people who came, they're in New Zealand, and I showed you 2 houses close together, didn't I? Yeah. That's a satellite picture. Let me tell you this. If you scour all the houses in New Zealand, you will see that those 2 houses are just outside Westport. However, that's a decoy because the people are low-key and they're still under danger. And I'm only getting in. I will not name the place because I'm still going through them and I'm still asking for access to further documents.
What exactly have you read?
I have read the fact of the events at Skull Hill, the description of the tomb, and the relationship of these things that we've been talking about today.
In Greek or Aramaic?
They were in Aramaic, but I have been reading English translation.
Well, what was that question? Who translated?
Translated by the descendants themselves and their predecessors.
Excuse me, John.
So you haven't seen the original paper?
Pardon?
You haven't seen the original 2,000-year-old paper? I can't imagine that would be survived.
No, the originals can't survive because they were written on parchment. Yeah, but these people have many of them have lost their lives guarding them, and the others have had to go underground. That's why they came to New Zealand. And this is why we're doing our best to tell you a story, but preserve the safety of certain people.
A lot of parchment does survive many, many thousands of years.
Yeah, sure, but and these are not experts at surviving stuff. I mean, they're just ordinary people.
Okay.
Have lots of copies been made, or can many copies be made, so if anything happens to,
You can
one
Xerox a
set,
few for
there
us.
will be more sets.
We're talking with them about this. We're talking to them
Highest
about this.
priority, please.
Yeah.
This is photographic evidence of other articles out of the temple.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Yes.
The mic, 'cause,
That's a good question.
yeah, here's a good question, please.
Right, if the ark could not be photographed, You said that there are other gold articles in there which is believed to be out of the temple. Now that could be useful evidence. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yes. One of these articles is now sitting in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Ron was asked to give evidence of what he was reporting to the authorities, and he brought out an article from the cave, and they examined it and they put it now on display, and they've got a little card. We've been into the museum, it's still there. Got a little card on which says this is the most sensational find. It's the only object on display from Solomon's temple. That itself is good evidence. Now I'll tell you something. Yes, I'll just say one other thing first, then I'll answer your question. Now Ron, probably many of us don't have the same beliefs as each other or Ron, but Ron was a very strict Christian man in his beliefs. And when just before he died on August the 4th, 1999, World Net Daily. How many of you have heard of World Net Daily? Okay, World Net Daily interviewed him at his bedside in the hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. And they said to him, Mr. Wyatt, what do you believe about the future? Mr. Wyatt said, I believe that I have to face my Redeemer. I have to face my Creator. Do you believe in a judgment day? Yes, I do. Do you believe that if a person tells lies that he has to face the judge ultimately on that? Ron said, yes, I do. He said, do you believe that what you have found, are you willing to state that what you have claimed to find is correct? Or do you want to recant or change anything? Do you want to add anything or subtract anything from what you've said? He said, I stand by everything I say if this is the last thing I ever say. I meet my judge knowing that I am clear in his eyes. I think a deathbed confession is probably the strongest evidence.
One more question? Yes, sir. Hold on.
Excuse my voice. I've been having problems. But in view of what you've said about Israel, why are they getting such bad press and such good stuff as they?
What's that last part, please?
She wants to know why the Israelis are getting bad press these days.
Oh, well.
Something to do with white phosphorus.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a question I think we all know the answer to that one. But what I would like to say is, in relation to the Israelis and the Ark of the Covenant, the Israeli government did they tested the waters. Because there's an extremist group want to blow up the Dome of the Rock, which is the third holiest Muslim site in the world, and they want to replace it with a third Jewish temple. And they want the Ark of the Covenant to be the centrepiece of that, and if they could lay their hands on it, boy, they would. Now, the Israeli government's very nervous about this, and so they tested the water, and they made a leak which indicated that the Ark of the Covenant had been found and that a new temple was going to be built. Immediately there was a bloodbath. 48, I think it was 100 and something Israelis were injured and 48 Arabs died. So they're very, very, very nervous about this.
Thank you. Wait a minute, we have one more question. I'm really sorry, it's just, we have to be out of here by 5 o'clock. I saw this gentleman's hand go up first. So if we could make it quick, which I doubt.
I'll be quick. No, thanks. A few of my questions are already asked and answered. And I'm just curious because you were saying that the whole legend of King Arthur and the Round Table was based on this, the meeting point on the circular stone. I was wondering, I figure with your vast knowledge, because I've seen some of your videos and I know you're very aware of a lot of things, the Glastonbury Zodiac, which definitely predates the Christian era, is also said to be the origin of King Arthur and the Round Table, and the 12 knights actually being the 12 signs of the zodiac, and this John Michel wrote a lot of books on this, and it being sort of a cosmic imprint, which is put in various places where the divine is sort of like laid out in the landscape. So I was just wanting your comment. Do you know about the Glastonbury Zodiac and the stories that is the origin of King Arthur and the Round Table legend? And one of the quick little things you can throw it in, because in one of your old videos, you talk about an old city that had, I believe, gold and silver foil wallpaper. Was that Persepolis you were speaking of? Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. That was Tom Brown.
Oh yeah, Tom. It's a lovely spot you got down there. Tom, yes, I'm aware of the Zodiac. It's a story only. It's not actually based upon historical reality, but there's bits of fact put in with the fiction. Now, the city that I spoke of is a city in the eastern jungles of Ecuador, and the wallpaper has been brought in the golden wallpaper and silver has been brought in from those dead cities and placed in a museum in Suenzo in the south part of Ecuador, which now has approval of the Ecuadorian government as a national treasure.